Who was Viserys Targaryen, portrayed by Paddy in House of the Dragon, the adaptation of the book Fire and Blood, and why he should have been given an Emmy nomination for 2023? Let's find out. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another video. Well then, my dear friends, as we all know at this point, the Emmys for 2023 have been nominated, and it has been revealed as the truth that awards can't be trusted today, that they really mean nothing, and that they are insignificant because merit isn't really being awarded these days, if you look at all the nominations out there. And even though there are a couple of nominations that I do agree with, for example, House of the Dragon receiving a nomination for the Best Drama, there are many choices that I would have made if I were to nominate certain people. For example, for a supporting actor, I would nominate Paddy as Viserys Targaryen in the House of the Dragon. Now, a lot of people have been very satisfied and a lot of people have been very dissatisfied with the House of the Dragon TV show released on HBO last year. I liked it a lot. If you are interested in my detailed reviews, they can be found on my channel. And I was comparing it at the time with The Rings of Power, which came out at the same time. Of course, you couldn't really avoid this kind of comparison because those two are fantasy shows and they're supposedly adapting to fantasy books. Now, in the case of House of the Dragon, it's true. In the case of The Rings of Power, it isn't, because as I have stated many times before, The Rings of Power, or as I like to call it, The Rings of Prime, is not really an adaptation of anything that Professor Tolkien wrote. But it was more or less the same situation for them, because none of the material that those two shows were adapting was a 100% narrative book. Now, The Rings of Power showrunners were always boasting that they are adapting the appendices to The Lord of the Rings, which is just and only a chapter worth of notes added to the end of The Lord of the Rings. And The House of the Dragon was adapting a book called Fire and Blood, which was obviously written by George R. R. Martin and was released in 2018. Instead of The Winds of Winter. But this video is not about that. But both of these books, or both of the material, is really not both of it per se, but let us focus on Fire and Blood, is a chronicle-like book, an annal-like book that was written from a point of view of several maesters and historians, and it very often happened that one event or another was described multiple times through the eyes and with the pen of several maesters, or as I said, historians, in which case some of those narrators were unreliable. So that means that this left for the showrunners and the screenwriters and the directors a little bit more room. So they did indeed take advantage of this. And the only two gripes that most of people had with this particular TV show was the promotion that came before the release of the show, and that promotion was very violent, and it attacked the biggest target audience there is for this kind of TV show, which is white men. And the second gripe people had with this was the race swap of the House Velaryon. But otherwise, the show was very good. The production was quality. The CGI was 100% better than The Rings of Power, and that's, must be striking, because if you compare the budgets for both of these shows, the Rings of Power had much bigger budget, yet it looked worse than House of the Dragon. And the acting in this TV show was extraordinary. And now every single actor, being a main character or a supporting character, did their job perfectly. And they were not acknowledged during these nominations for the Emmys, and that only shows you why awards can't be trusted. Now, who is Viserys Targaryen? He really is one of the more popular and favorite characters from this quote-unquote expanded universe of the House, the Game of Thrones, or A Song of Ice and Fire, him being the fifth, I believe, Targaryen to sit on the Iron Throne, ruling at the beginning of really the rule of the Targaryens, and he succeeded his more famous grandfather, Jaehaerys I, and he was one of those kings who were very peaceful. He was a very, very nice guy. He enjoyed tournaments, and he enjoyed huge balls and feasts, and he liked luxury and plenty. But at the same time, he was not a warmonger. He didn't enjoy slaughter and conquest. He was a very pleasant man who was nice to people, and if I'm not wrong, he was popular both among the aristocracy and the plebs, the common people. So, and some people, of course, would consider this kind of king to be a weakling king, or a boring king. Now, of course, if you compare Viserys with some of the more warlike kings and conquerors, of course that the annals and the histories, the historias, would talk about the more conqueror-like king more than the peaceful king who really didn't expand upon the land more, or who didn't wage any huge wars, because, as another author, Tolkien, mentioned in The Hobbit, and I'm paraphrasing, very little can be said about peaceful times, whereas a lot can be said about awful times. But, yeah, and this also resulted the fact that Viserys was a very joyful king who enjoyed his food and drink, in very bad health later in his life. But also, apart from having problems with respiration and different pains and aching joints and things like that, apparently he cut himself on the Iron Throne, and that resulted in something very, very bad for him. And in the end, he perished once again as one of the very few in the history of the kings of Westeros in his sleep, from apparently natural causes. Now, his demise was discovered by one of his servants, and he then said that to Alicent, his wife at the time. She hid it from the public for some time. She summoned the small council, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, what was to happen is the Dance of the Dragons, or the civil war in between the house. But this is not the matter here. The matter here is that they managed to portray the character of Viserys Targaryen precisely like this, but also adding a little bit more spice to it, a little bit more drama, a little bit more action that was needed for a TV show. The wide audience, the plebs, the normal people, the normies, they wouldn't enjoy watching a TV show about just a beige, bland king. I don't consider him to be that. I prefer peace and prosperity over war. I'm a pacifist. But people who watch fantasy action TV shows, they prefer action, drama. And Paddy Considine was precisely that man who was able to do that. Portray a character like this, and having scenes which just he stole the show with them. His speech by the end of the season, man, oh man, in my mind, that even topped the performance of, what is his name? Tyrion Lannister, when he had his most famous speech in the Game of Thrones. So I would really nominate Paddy Considine. I would give him the award immediately if it were up to me. But it is not to be, because awards are just a joke today. But let me know in the comments down below what you think, and that will be all. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm out of here.